The spoon struck the porcelain bowl with a sharp clang that made Mr. Everett flinch. His wife had never slammed cutlery in her life, not even during their worst arguments, but tonight she did it with a fury that sliced through the polished calm of the restaurant. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers spread across the room, bouncing off chandeliers and mirrored walls. The finest restaurant in Crescent City, a sanctuary of silk gowns and starched tuxedos, was suddenly pierced by a note of chaos. At that very moment, outside the frost-glazed window, a boy pressed his hands against the glass. His palms left smudges on the spotless surface. His breath fogged the edges. He was thin, clothes worn through at the elbows, and his shoes looked like they'd been held together by hope more than stitching. His name was Isaiah. He had been homeless for months, scavenging from dumpsters, sleeping under bridges. Hunger had become the rhythm of his days, and the aroma of roasted lamb and garlic butter from inside felt like torture. But his eyes weren't fixed on the food alone. They were darting, restless, watching something the others inside were too busy pretending not to see. Mr. Everett, 74 years old, was known throughout the city as a man of empire. He had built chain after chain of luxury hotels, a real estate kingdom so vast that his name gleamed on glass towers from the waterfront to the hills. Tonight, dressed in his navy suit, cufflinks glinting, he looked every bit the monarch surveying his dominion. Yet his voice was gentle when he turned to his wife. "Camilla, are you all right?" he asked, puzzled by her trembling hands. Camilla Everett didn't answer at first. Her gaze flicked between the table and the phone hidden in her lap. She was decades younger than her husband, a woman who had stepped out of fashion magazines with her long dark hair and perfectly manicured nails. Tonight, her smile seemed painted, too stiff. The wine glass in her hand rattled as though her grip had betrayed her. Isaiah, from his post outside, noticed the detail no one else caught. The way Camilla slipped a hand into her clutch and drew out a tiny vial, no larger than a thimble. It sparkled under the chandelier's light for a split second before she tipped its contents into Mr. Everett's soup. The liquid vanished instantly, leaving no trace. The boy's chest tightened. His instincts screamed that something terrible had just happened. He had lived long enough on the streets to recognize danger in subtle disguises, the way a stranger's smile hid cruelty, the way a friendly hand could mask a thief's fingers. What he saw now carried that same silent malice. Inside, Mr. Everett adjusted his napkin, oblivious, and lifted his spoon. "They say the chef added truffle this season," he murmured. He lowered the spoon toward the broth. Isaiah's breath caught. His hunger vanished, replaced by panic. His fists pounded against the glass. "Don't eat that." His voice cracked, raw from nights of shouting himself awake from nightmares. Heads inside jerked toward the window. Laughter bubbled in corners, irritation in others. Who was this ragged boy disturbing their evening? Camilla's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. "Security," she snapped, her voice slicing through the din. But Mr. Everett froze mid-gesture, spoon hovering above the bowl. His gaze shifted from the soup to his wife's pale face, then back to the boy's frantic eyes on the other side of the glass. Something unsettled stirred in his chest. He wasn't a man who believed in omens, yet something about the desperation in that boy's shout felt too sharp to dismiss. The maitre d' rushed over, bowing apologies, signaling for the guards. Camilla reached across the table, forcing a shaky laugh. "He's lying," she hissed in her husband's ear. "Just a filthy kid trying to cause trouble. Don't let him ruin our night." But her words spilled out too quickly, almost rehearsed. Everett's brow furrowed. For decades, deals worth billions had balanced on his ability to detect deception. He had built fortunes by noticing when a partner blinked too fast or smiled too wide. And his wife's smile now. It was trembling, strained, unnatural. Isaiah slammed his fist once more against the glass. "It's poison," he shouted, his voice breaking. "She put something in it. Don't drink." The crowd erupted in scandalized gasps. Phones appeared, recording, eager to capture scandal in real time. Camilla's hand shot out, trying to pull the bowl away, but Everett stopped her. Slowly, he lowered the spoon back into the soup. His heart pounded, not from fear of the boy, but from the tiny seed of doubt now sprouting inside him. "Enough of this nonsense," Camilla insisted, her voice rising shrill. But Everett leaned back, studying her with eyes that had sized up skyscrapers before they even existed. A silence stretched between them, a silence thick with suspicion. He raised his hand, halting the approaching guards. "Wait," he commanded. His voice was quiet, but iron hard. The guards froze. The restaurant held its breath. The boy outside pressed his face closer to the glass, eyes wide with urgency, his breath steaming circles that blurred his features. Everett stared at him, then at his wife, then at the soup. The once lavish dinner had turned into a theater of accusation, and everyone was watching to see whether the king of Crescent City would believe the ragged prophet at his window or the polished queen at his table. Everett's hands trembled, but not from age. He looked at Camilla, her knuckles white on the tablecloth, her lips tight, and felt something fracture inside him. He set his spoon down with care, as if laying aside a loaded weapon. And in that moment, he realized his evening was no longer about lamb and wine or polite conversations under crystal light. It was about survival, about truth, about whether his wife had just tried to end his life. As murmurs rippled around him, Everett lifted his gaze toward the boy outside. Isaiah's eyes pleaded, a raw mixture of terror and hope. For once, the billionaire and the beggar were bound by the same fragile thread, the knowledge that a single mouthful could decide everything. The restaurant no longer felt like a sanctuary of wealth and comfort. Conversations hushed, forks froze midair, and even the jazz trio in the corner stopped playing as if the saxophone itself had swallowed its notes. All eyes were on Everett, Camilla, and the boy pressed against the window. In those tense seconds, Crescent City's most powerful man felt like a defendant standing trial before an audience of strangers. Camilla recovered first. She straightened, pushing her chair back with a graceful sweep, as though she were performing on stage. Her voice trembled with an imitation of outrage. "Are you all seriously entertaining the ramblings of a vagrant? Look at him, dirty, barefoot, clearly deranged. He's jealous of us." That's all. Her manicured hand gestured toward the boy with a dismissive flick, but her eyes refused to meet Everett's. Isaiah, his breath fogging the glass, pounded harder. "I swear I saw it." She poured something in. "Please believe me." His voice cracked again, scraping against the silence. The guards, waiting for their master's command, hesitated. The maitre d' wrung his hands, torn between protecting his guests and shielding the restaurant's reputation. Everett raised a hand to silence them all. His voice, though calm, carried an edge that silenced the room. "Bring the boy inside." Gasps echoed, scandalized. Camilla's lips parted, shock flaring. "Everett, this is madness." But the old man did not waver. The guards obeyed, opening the glass doors. A rush of cold air swept into the room, followed by the boy's hesitant steps. Isaiah stumbled in, his sneakers leaving muddy prints on marble tiles. Patrons recoiled, clutching handbags and handkerchiefs as though he carried disease. But Everett's gaze softened, noticing the way Isaiah hugged his arms across his chest, trembling not just from cold, but from fear. "What did you see?" Everett asked, his voice low. Isaiah swallowed. He had never been this close to such luxury, and the chandeliers above seemed to mock him with their brilliance. But he forced his words out, each one dragged from his gut. She poured from a glass vial, clear liquid, right into your soup. I know what poison looks like. I've seen it before." A wave of laughter rolled through the tables, forced and nervous. A portly man sneered, "What does a street rat know about poison?" Isaiah's jaw tightened. His memories clawed back, his mother collapsing in their shelter after sharing food laced with rat poison meant for vermin, not people. The memory of her lips foaming, her eyes rolling back, haunted him every night. He had seen poison steal breath. He recognized its silent attack. Camilla clutched her pearls dramatically. "This is outrageous slander. Everett, darling, don't tell me you're entertaining this nonsense. He's trying to extort us. Look, already spinning tales." But Everett leaned closer to the soup. His reflection rippled on. The surface, distorted, uncertain. Slowly, he pushed the bowl away. "Why do you carry a vial, Camilla?" Her mask cracked for a heartbeat. She laughed too quickly, the sound brittle. "Medicine, of course. For my migraines. You know, Isaiah cut in, his voice breaking. "She didn't drink it herself. She tipped it into yours." The crowd buzzed, scandal mounting. Phones captured every twitch, every tremor. The billionaire's empire was built on reputation, and now that reputation was trembling on the precipice of destruction. Camilla rose from her seat. towering in indignation. "This has gone far enough. Call the police. I won't sit here and let this filthy child smear my name." Everett, though, remained seated. He watched her with a gaze honed by decades of negotiation. "Yes," he murmured. "Call the police." Camilla froze, color draining from her face. "What?" "Call them," Everett repeated, louder this time. "If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. But if you are guilty, then perhaps the boy has done me a greater service than I can repay." The room erupted in murmurs. Isaiah shrank under the sudden attention, but Everett placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The warmth of that touch startled him. It was the first time in months anyone had touched him without hostility. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived, striding across the marble floor with authority. Camilla tried to maintain her composure, rehearsed indignation dripping from every word. "Thank goodness you're here. This boy is a menace. He barged in, accused me of poisoning my husband. Me, his wife. Can you imagine?" The officers turned to Everett. "Sir, what exactly happened?" Everett's gaze shifted from his wife to the boy. For the first time in his long, calculated life, he chose uncertainty over decorum. "I want that soup tested," he said firmly, "and I want my wife questioned." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Camilla's hands trembled, fury radiating. "Everett, how dare you humiliate me like this?" But Everett did not flinch. "I dare because my life may depend on it." The officers exchanged looks, then carefully lifted the bowl as evidence. Camilla sputtered, her voice cracking. "You can't honestly, after everything." She broke off, her mask slipping as anger overtook fear. Isaiah stood rooted, heart pounding. He expected to be thrown out, punished for interfering. Instead, he watched in awe as the balance of power shifted, not because he was strong or wealthy, but because he had spoken the truth. Camilla was escorted to the side, her protests growing shriller with each step. Everett sat back, exhaustion written across his lined face. The boy at his side remained silent, torn between triumph and terror. He had shouted, and the world had heard. But what would come next? The officers promised lab results within the hour. The restaurant resumed in fragments, diners whispering, staff scrambling, cameras flashing like fireworks. The once perfect evening had unraveled into scandal. Everett leaned down toward Isaiah. "Why did you warn me?" he asked quietly. Isaiah's eyes dropped to the floor. "Because I couldn't watch someone die the way my mother did." His voice cracked, almost lost under the clatter of cutlery. "Nobody believed me then either. Nobody cared. I thought, maybe you'd listen." The old man's throat tightened. In the boy's voice, he heard echoes of his own childhood, growing up in poverty before his empire, when no one believed a word he said. For decades, he had buried that past under marble floors and silk curtains. Tonight, it clawed its way back. Camilla's shrieks echoed from the corner, muffled now by the officers' stern voices. Isaiah hugged himself tighter, suddenly aware of the glares from patrons who blamed him for spoiling their evening. Everett noticed. He reached for his coat, draping it across the boy's shoulders. "Ignore them." "You did right." Isaiah blinked up at him, confused. No one had ever said those words to him before. The hour crawled by. Tension gnawed at every table. When the officers finally returned, silence fell again. One officer cleared his throat. "Preliminary tests show the soup contains a high concentration of a toxic compound. Had you ingested it, sir, the consequences would have been fatal." The crowd erupted in shocked gasps. Phones buzzed furiously. Camilla's composure shattered entirely. She lunged forward, shrieking, "It wasn't supposed to!" before being restrained. Her words died on her tongue, but the damage was done. The confession hung in the air, undeniable. Everett closed his eyes, the betrayal slicing deeper than any blade. The woman he had trusted, cherished, paraded as his beloved, had plotted his end. His empire, his fortune, his life, reduced to a line in a police report. Isaiah stood frozen, his small frame dwarfed by the chaos. The officers led Camilla away, her cries echoing down the polished hall until the doors slammed shut behind her. Silence pressed in once more. Everett opened his eyes, finding the boy still at his side, trembling yet unflinching. In that moment, the billionaire saw not a ragged intruder, but a savior draped in rags. He rose slowly, the room parting around him. Resting a hand on Isaiah's shoulder, he spoke not to the crowd, but to the boy. "You saved my life tonight. I will not forget that his words were steady, though grief trembled beneath them. Isaiah's lips parted, but no sound came. Gratitude, relief, disbelief tangled in his chest. For once, the world had not ignored him. For once, his voice had mattered. As they left the restaurant together, flashbulbs exploded outside, journalists shouting questions. Everett shielded the boy with his coat, guiding him past the frenzy. For Isaiah, the night air felt different, not just cold, but filled with the maybe strange, fragile warmth of possibility. And, deep within, Everett knew this was only the beginning. The poison had been stopped, but the wounds of betrayal, the weight of gratitude, and the unlikely bond between a billionaire and a boy from the streets, those stories were just starting to unfold. The city never slept, but that night, Crescent City seemed to hold its breath. News of the restaurant scandal spread like wildfire. By dawn, headlines blared from every screen. Billionaire saved by homeless boy after wife's poison plot. Reporters swarmed outside Everett's estate, their lenses hungry for the image of a fallen queen and her dethroned king. Inside the mansion, its marble floors echoing with silence, Everett sat across from Isaiah at a long oak table that could have seated 30. The boy hunched at the edge, overwhelmed by the sheer space around him. Before him sat a plate piled with eggs, toast, and fruit. He ate cautiously, as if the food might vanish. Everett watched, a pang of guilt twisting in his chest. How had a city with towers bearing his name allowed a child to go hungry while he dined on caviar? When Isaiah finally set his fork down, Everett cleared his throat. "Do you have anywhere to go?" The boy shook his head. His voice was small. "Not since Mama." He trailed off. Silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. Everett leaned back, fingers steepled. He had weathered betrayals before, partners who stole, rivals who schemed, but nothing had pierced him like the sight of Camilla's vial. Yet across the table sat the boy who had risked mockery, violence, even disbelief to save him. A boy no one else would have listened to. "You'll stay here for now," Everett said. The decision rolled off his tongue with the weight of a verdict. "You'll have a room, clothes, school if you want it. No more streets." Isaiah's eyes widened, disbelief warring with hope. "Why?" "Because," Everett replied, his voice rough, "you shouted when no one else did. You reminded me that a voice doesn't need money to matter." For the first time in months, Isaiah smiled, a hesitant, fragile thing. But outside, the storm was far from over. Camilla's trial became the city's obsession. Her lawyers painted her as desperate, lonely, overshadowed by an aging husband who controlled her life. But leaked recordings told another story. Phone calls with a lover, discussions of inheritance, plans drawn in hushed tones. The city's sympathy evaporated. She was sentenced swiftly, her fall as dramatic as her rise had been. Yet even as justice was served, Everett found no victory in it. Nights stretched long, haunted by memories of laughter that had once filled his halls. Betrayal cut deeper when it came from within your own home. Isaiah noticed. He saw the old man wander the gardens alone, saw the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. One evening, the boy crept into the study, clutching a worn notebook. I wrote something." Everett looked up from his untouched brandy. "What is it?" Isaiah shuffled forward, placing the notebook on the desk. "It's my story. About Mama. About the streets. About that night. You said voices matter. I want." Mind Everett opened the notebook. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, but the words hit like hammer blows. Descriptions of hunger, of being invisible, of shouting into a world that refused to hear. And woven through it all was a stubborn thread of hope. The old man closed the book gently. "This shouldn't stay in a drawer," he said. "The city needs to hear you." Weeks later, Everett's Hotels hosted a charity gala. Not for investors, not for politicians, but for the forgotten children of Crescent City. At the center of the stage stood Isaiah, clutching his notebook. Cameras flashed, murmurs rippled, but the boy's voice rang clear. He spoke of hunger, of loss, of the night he pounded on glass while a room full of elites laughed. He told them what it meant to be seen, to be heard. And for once the city listened. Everett stood in the wings, pride swelling where sorrow had been. The boy had not just saved his life, he was reshaping it. But the twist came quietly. Months later, in a letter slipped under Everett's door. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakable. Camilla. You think you've won, Everett. But I never wanted your empire. I wanted freedom. Prison gave me that in ways your wealth never did. And you, chained to guilt, parading a boy as your redemption. You're the one still imprisoned. I may have lost the world's favor, but I found my truth. Can you say the same? Everett read the words again and again, fury first, then confusion, then something like pity. For the first time, he wondered if Camilla's crime had been less about greed and more about escape. From a life she had never chosen, from a man whose empire consumed all light around him. He set the letter down, staring at Isaiah's notebook on his desk. The boy's words about being invisible suddenly echoed with new weight. Perhaps Camilla, too, had felt invisible in a gilded cage. That night, Everett didn't sleep. At dawn, he called Isaiah into the study. You saved me from death, but maybe there's another way you can save me now. Isaiah frowned. How? By reminding me every day that people aren't ornaments or assets or trophies. They're voices, their lives. If I forget that, you shout at me again, just like you did in that restaurant. Isaiah grinned, the weight in his eyes lighter. I can do that. And he did. Together, they transformed Everett's wealth into scholarships, shelters, and programs that lifted voices once drowned in silence. The boy who had once shouted through glass now stood before microphones, not begging to be believed, but demanding change. The billionaire and the homeless boy, an unlikely pair bound by betrayal, poison, and truth, walked side by side into a future neither had expected. Everett found not redemption, but responsibility. Isaiah found not charity, but a platform. And though the city still whispered about Camilla, her letter tucked away in Everett's desk, it no longer haunted him. For he had discovered something more enduring than empire, more powerful than betrayal, the courage of a voice that refuses to be ignored. So when you hear a shout from the margins, a desperate cry in the middle of comfort, ask yourself if you're willing to listen. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come dressed in silken pearls. Sometimes it comes barefoot, breath-fogging glass pounding on the window of your indifference. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, share this story with someone who needs the reminder. Drop your thoughts respectfully in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you want more stories of resilience, betrayal, and the triumph of truth, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps keep these voices alive.